Good evening, a warm welcome on this lovely lengthening spring evening to the second of our Create Streets planning webinars. My name is Nicholas Boyce-Smith. I'm the director of Create Streets and I am your chair for the next hour. I hope you've all got a nice mug of tea or a cool glass of wine. Over the next hour, and it will strictly be an hour, we are going to be talking about digital planning. And what finer words are there in the English language than that? At any rate, that's what the subject is. Now, before I say anything and temper your views on this, I would like to start with a poll. And Constance, if you could bring up the poll. The poll is because basically I want our speakers to know whether they've got a friendly audience or not. Do you think digital planning is big news or hot air? And by hot air, I don't mean something rude. I mean that it's all talk and no trousers. So big news or hot air? If you can vote, and we'll hopefully be able to tell you. Oh, hang on, I'm not managing to vote. Someone's asking if you can vote for both. No, you can't vote for both. I can't right now vote for one. I hope other people being able to vote because I'm actually not managing to. Oh, I can't vote. Hosts and panelists can't vote. I was going to try and warp it. So hang on, and hopefully I'll have the results of that in a moment. While we're waiting for the results, I'll move on. Constance, if you can send me the results in 2 seconds. Now, with new ways of online working, with major reforms to planning on the horizon initiative by the white paper, there is an opportunity to introduce innovation with lasting impact. One of the key pillars of change, and probably one of the less controversial ones, is more digital planning. The white paper mentions digital planning 51 times, digital 51 times. Here we are. So we have got the results hot in. 75% of you think that digital planning is big news. Which means that 25% of you think that digital planning is hot air. So there you go, guys, you've got a largely friendly audience this evening. Proposal 6 of the white paper from August of last year said, I won't quote the whole thing, don't worry, decision-making should be faster and more certain, with firm deadlines and make greater use of digital technology. For all types of planning applications, regardless of the category of land, we want to see a more streamlined and digitally enabled end-to-end process. That's not just community engagement, which is proportionate to the scale and nature of the development proposal to ensure decisions are made faster. And the well-established time limits of 8 or 13 weeks should be a firm deadline, not an aspiration which can be got around through extensions of time, as routinely happens now. That was just me reading. So there's some of the contents for this evening. Some of the questions we'll be getting to in a moment. What is digital planning? Why should we care about it? How can councils, developers and communities take advantage of it? What changes possibly following on the white paper? Can digital planning help us to meet important social and environmental targets? What are the risks? And will digital planning, will it be a leveler of the playing field, or will it be doing the opposite? Will it be helping the big boys and girls, or will it actually make it easier for the neighbour community group or for the smaller developer? Those are the discussions we have, and we've got a very expert panel. Thank you all very much. Above all, thank you to Instinctif for very kindly supporting this evening's discussion. Kelly Edwards, who's a partner at Instinctif, specialises in stakeholder engagement and local engagement decisions, mainly working in the arena of planning. She's also the former councillor in a largely urban, but also partly rural unitary authority in the southeast. Also speaking this evening, because I'm doing ladies first, because I'm being old-fashioned. Sue Vincent, head of learning at Urban Design London, and has also been a councillor at the London Borough of Camden, and been lead cabinet member for environment, transport, and planning, and is chair of the National Design Network. So both Kelly and Sue, if you like, are able to respond with 2 hats on, and they'll be responding to Euan Mills and to Alistair Parvin. Euan is a transformation manager at MHCLG Digital, so that seems rather relevant. He's got many years' experience working in the built environment industry for the Mayor of London at Urban Design. No, I was going to say Urban Design Catapult. That's not the right name. I forget what it is. What's it called? What was it called? Place Catapult, something like that. And is a visiting lecturer at several universities, and is a deep expert on digital planning. And last but by no means least, Alistair Parvin, the Chief Executive of Open Systems Lab, a non-for-profit R&D company developing digital technologies to transform housing, planning, construction and development. And their current projects include WikiHouse and PlanX, which are both very exciting. So there we go. If you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A function. Please do put in questions. And off we go. I think it is Euan first, so I shall put on my microphone to mute. And Euan, welcome. tell us why digital planning is big news, not hot air.
Thank you, Nicholas. Well, I mean, if we can actually vote, but I was actually going to vote that digital planning is actually hot air. I'm not sure if hot air is the right expression, but hopefully you can all see my screen. If you can nod, okay, good. So yeah, I mean, I titled this talk "Fixing the Remedial to Build the Foundations for the Radical," because I did actually want to talk about some of the more boring aspects of digital planning, because I think this is kind of
right. Alistair next, can move on.
Because I think I think it's also kind of the most important aspect, and I think it addresses a lot of kind of the preconceptions that we have around digital. But in essence, it's about information, and kind of the problem that I think we kind of face in planning in the built environment industry today is that information about what can be built where is actually very difficult to find, to use, and to trust. And I think kind of nothing reflects that more than kind of the classic planning notice, which, by the way, I'm a big fan of planning notices on lampposts personally. I think they are a good medium. The thing is, they're very hard to decipher if you try and read them, and that's kind of the main point of contact that most of us have with the planning system. And if you follow the links that a planning notice might have, this one might have even a QR code. You end up seeing these things, right? These planning registers which local authorities have, and they're very, very difficult to use and very, very difficult to decipher. So you can't really see much of the information here. But if you could, the tweet on the left kind of shows lots of icons of PDF documents, all kind of named supporting information 01, supporting information 02, supporting information 03, and it's very hard to actually kind of find the information that you want. And this seems to be kind of quite common across different planning authorities, and partly this is because we rely quite heavily on kind of semi-analog ways to collect information. And what I mean by that is they're not fully analog, right? So I mean, we do still have local authorities which have kind of forms like this, and they write, look, it's a single story extension by hand. But what we've moved on to a world now where at least we put these things on a computer, right? And we might put them online as PDF documents. But they're still kind of semi-analog. All the geographic information that we have, for example, is embedded in PDF documents, which kind of is a problem for a number of different reasons. Not only planning application information, but also the policies that we create. So I mean, it's great for professional consultants that can kind of navigate this world of kind of different documents in different places and under different names with different local authorities, some central kind of government documents, some local authority documents, some neighborhood documents. But for most of it, it's quite difficult to understand what can happen where, what is happening where. I mean, if we actually kind of get to read the policy, find the relevant policy, kind of trying to understand what it actually means, is also kind of quite challenging quite often. And there's lots of different reasons for that. But I think it's fair to say that we don't tend to say what we mean or mean what we say when we write planning policy quite often. But there is a lot of very useful information within the planning system. So these are kind of PDF documents, links to PDF documents of where I live in Hackney in London, and they're the evidence base for the local plan. Each one of these documents cost at least £50,000 to commission from usually from consultants, and they have appendices with lots of very, very kind of interesting information, whether this is to do with employment, whether this is to do with kind of heritage, whether it's to do with air quality, lots of very, very good information, but all of it, again, kind of embedded in these kind of the semi-analog format of PDF documents, kind of not very well named and quite hard to find. And there's a huge amount of this information. Right, so we tend to see about 450,000 planning applications per year. So all of these planning applications, for example, have a red line boundary, which, surprise, surprise, is in a PDF document, which a lot of local authorities then have to kind of trace over and redraw. 364 local plans every 5 years, not to mention all the other SPDs, all the other documents, right? So I think the planning system has a wealth of information, huge amount of information, but it really suffers because of the lack of digitization that is kind of predominant in the system. So, Nicholas, my favorite paragraph of the planning white paper is slightly different to yours, and it's this one, which I think is kind of, in a way, it sets quite an important ambition and something quite simple, but also quite fundamental about kind of moving the planning system from a process based on documents to a process based on data. And I think hopefully kind of you'll be able to see why this is important. Not only because it makes information easy to find, but also because we rely on data to build services. Digital services nowadays rely on good kind of authoritative data. And as I've just kind of illustrated, we don't really have that in the planning system today. But quite often when we talk about planning data, we ask kind of people say, well, what do you mean by planning data, right? What is planning data? And I think it's a very, very valid question because kind of what do we actually mean? And what we start finding is that there's lots of different types of planning data. If you take a local plan, for example, that's a document, right? That's a document. That in itself, just the existence of that document is data. That document might have that local plan might have a status, say it's adopted. That's data. It might have a boundary, a geography to it. Kind of that's data. It might have lots of metrics in it, lots of values, whether they're housing numbers, employment floor space. These are all kind of data. It's very likely that the local plan will have been produced by a local authority, right? That's an organization. That's data. Or maybe it was a neighborhood plan, in which case the neighborhood forum is the organization. So there's all sorts of different types of data within kind of when we start kind of really looking at it. And the same with kind of planning decisions, right? Is it an outline planning application or is it a detailed application? That's data. How many homes does a planning application have? That's data. What is a red line boundary? That's data. So pretty much everything, all the information that we have within the planning system, whether it's the policy side or on the planning decision side, is data. And what we need to try and kind of do is think, okay, well, so how can we kind of move away from this world where all this information is kind of somehow kind of disappeared into kind of local authority websites and make it a lot easier to find, to use and trust. And there's a few different degrees and a few different things that kind of the team have been kind of working on for a few years now. But on one level, and again, this is why I think this is kind of quite boring and quite remedial, but also incredibly important, making things discoverable, right? So if a local plan exists, we need to know that local plan exists, right? We need to know that a planning decision exists. Everything needs a kind of a unique reference number, which means you can find it, right? Find it online. It might still just be a document, which is fine, but we need to make sure that the way that document is named and that there's a unique reference number to that will ensure that document is findable wherever you are online. The next level is start thinking about making things machine readable. So within kind of what your policy documents or your planning applications, there's some key metrics. For example, conservation areas in this case, right? It's very hard to find a national map of conservation areas because you find that each local authority kind of names the conservation areas in a slightly different way, and they draw them in a slightly different way. They save them in a slightly different format. So if you're someone that's interested in conservation areas for a number of reasons, which I think Alistair is going to touch on one, do you need planning permission to do something to the front of your house? Well, whether you're in a conservation area or not is a very important metric. And then the third and kind of most ambitious, which is probably something that we're not going to be kind of I don't think be able to. It's kind of a longer term project, but I think Alice is going to touch on a good example of how we can do this. Is actually how can we turn some of the rules and the policies, which again is data in itself, but how can we turn them into code? So I think there's not really kind of much out of kind of relatively remedial things that we need to do to make all this planning information kind of more discoverable and more machine readable. It's a long process, but I think critically, I think we need to start learning how to kind of value the information that we have. So you can in the same way that librarians kind of are great at kind of managing information, I think planners and local authorities needs to start kind of thinking about kind of how do they hold their data registers, what the format these data registers are, how accessible they are, and what is information in these data registers. What are your policies in there? Are your planning decisions, and how much information can you actually do? So I think that's kind of the key message that I wanted to get across is that this is a lot of this stuff is actually quite simple and quite remedial. It's about making information easier to find, to use, and to trust.
Brilliant, Euan. That was a tour de force. Thank you. documents which are discoverable, machine readable and codified. And I will hand straight over to Alistair. There you go, Mr. Parvin, you've got a tough act to follow.
Fantastic, great. Yes, I mean, you're going to be able to tell that Euan and I clearly spend too much time talking together because I'm definitely going to be picking up the boring baton and running with it. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about work that we're doing with a number of different local authorities at the moment to try and sort of start at the small end of what some of this might look like. As Euan says, when you sort of hear the phrase digital planning, you tend to immediately jump towards ideas around interfaces like AR and drones and sensors and all this kind of stuff. But at the heart of it is this much more boring layer, which is really this question of what does the web mean for information and even really knowledge, actually. And of course, those of you familiar, as I'm sure all of you are, with the kind of planning system as it is today, knows that sort of broadly it's a labyrinth at the moment. So even if you're doing a relatively simple project, such as building an extension on your house or something, you've got to navigate at least 8 or 9 separate websites, separate documents. You've got to dig through all of them to find out which bits apply to you. And we always say planning suffers from the Donald Rumsfeld problem in the sense that you don't know what you don't know. So this is kind of hugely prohibitive. I mean, Donald Rumsfeld had other issues, but it's hugely prohibitive to non-experts and to small players, as we know, and this is really just the beginning of it. Now, we're pretty familiar with these pain points from, if you like, the public side and from the applicant side. But actually, what we've discovered as we've worked with local authorities is that all of exactly the same pain points show up on the local authority side too, right? In the sense that most of planners' time is not spent planning. It is spent kind of processing applications, sort of doing validation, dealing with failure demand, managers trying to manage consistency, simply having to read and assess. Most information churning through the system is redundant, to people. So there's this kind of failure on all sides, really, pain point on all sides. And one of the many symptoms of that which astounded us was this one, which is this fact that of all planning applications that are received, around half are invalid. In other words, they have to be sent back before even planning officers even really start looking at them, and that can cause delays of a month or more. So and what's really interesting is when you start sweating some of the available data about that, is that the reasons for invalidation are kind of hilariously kind of banal a lot of the time. It's things like the red line, the line around the site on the location plan wasn't read, or it was missing a north point, or the fee had been calculated incorrectly. So these are really kind of avoidable things, and yet they're having this huge social, economic, and arguably democratic burden. Even though they're such sort of apparently mundane things. So as Euan says, at the core of this is fundamentally this format change, which is that our planning system was designed before computers or the World Wide Web. Its original operating system was paper. And although now we've moved from paper documents to PDF documents, essentially the basic thing hasn't really changed, in the sense that every single piece of information has to be manually written and manually read and sorted through and passed through by humans every single time. And so the opportunity that we have is to shift to a kind of an operating system, if you like, which is really just the web, which is where information is not just human readable, but also machine readable. And that allows us to do lots and lots of really cool things. It basically means that relevant information can come to us instead of us having to dig through everything to find the relevant information. It's a kind of really boring way of putting it. And I won't talk about this too much because Euan already touched on this perfectly, really. There's a whole realms of, there's whole sort of different subsets of information that are out there. But particularly one we're interested in is this one on the left, which is increasingly being referred to as rules as code. So which is trying to codify guidance, policies, legislation, and even case law in a machine readable, machine structurable way to be used by these sorts of digital planning services and many other things besides. So we started working on these things, what the Scottish government are calling smart planning services. Part of me always slightly smarts when I hear the word smart, but it is, I admit, not a bad name to describe what they're doing. And this is, sort of following we kind of began with some really foundational design principles, which which is they should be transparent, they should be auditable, they shouldn't ask for information that is already known. And there shouldn't be any black box algorithms and so forth. And crucially, we should put planners in control, and I'll come back to that a bit at the end. So the kind of very first place to start is sort of starting in some of the kind of smaller parts, if you like, of the services. The first thing that we explored building was this service called Find Out If You Need Planning Permission, which if it seems at first sight like quite a simple thing to do, you'd think, but those of you who've tried to do this will know that it's far from straightforward to navigate the GPDO. And I'm going to take a risk here and risk doing an actual demo of this service very quickly. So here we go. I will just enter in an address. Every service pretty much always starts with the questions of where are you and what do you want to do, essentially, because all else depends on that. But the first thing we can do is pull in all the available data that we have about that property, which today is pretty limited. But this is the power of those data registers. It's the more embedded data that we have, the more data we should be able to be pulling in the planning history, for example, of the property here as well. But it's telling us whether it's in a conservation area and so forth. Let's do something really, really simple for the sake of brevity here. Let's add some roof lights to this house. It's asking us some quick questions here. We can use things like illustrations. That's really helpful because there's an awful lot of things that are hard to understand in words, but are much easier to understand in pictures. For each question, we can pull in this sort of more information. So these sorts of more information like, why does it matter? And crucially, the policy source. Which piece of legislation does this have its roots in? You and whose army? And we'll go down here. Okay, it's going to be under here. We'll say no, and there we are. Okay, really quickly, we arrived at a very quick assessment of this, which is, based on what we've told us, it looks like it falls within permitted development, and we can know, for example, if it's in an Article 4 area that's rescinded this right, etc. All that can be picked up. So we can take what would have a process that would have taken, really hours and hours or days and weeks, and make it much faster. So yeah, that's that. What we're now currently working on is using the same sorts of rules as code approach to build services like Apply for planning permission. This is a service we're working on called Apply for a Certificate of Lawfulness, doing the same thing. And that has loads of cool benefits. So for example, not even asking for location plans, actually saying, why are we asking for PDF location plans? Let's just ask for data. Let's ask users, give the opportunity for users to just draw that boundary on a digital map instead and submit that instead. Giving people a structured thing that says, look, these are the required drawings. You don't have to look it up on a separate document. What are the required drawings for your type of planning application? That's built into the service. And indeed automatically kind of calculating the fee. So, we're really sort of cautiously optimistic that with this sorts of approach, we can hopefully reduce the rate of invalid planning applications by something between 50 and 80%. And we're working with this fantastic sister project, which is called BOPS, which is working on a back office system designed to take this data as well, to take these applications so that officers can handle them more quickly. Now, the single most important point to make about all this is that no artificial intelligence was used in the creation of this tool. So we'll say it's about making tools that are powered by planners' intelligence. The barrier to this, the obvious problem is this, right? Which is that, the number of people who are responsible for planning services and the number of people who can code is very, very low. So we're like, well, how do we square this circle? Actually this, right? We said, right, what we've got to find a way to do is allow people to write, say, a design code or a piece of legislation on the left in a language that both a human and a machine can understand, and that's flowcharts. And by the way, it's pretty watertight. It's actually often you find the loopholes in the one on the left by writing the one on the right. And so actually we're building this hopefully quite useful piece of digital infrastructure called PlanX, which makes it really easy for planning officers and content designers to write this stuff and to share their stuff and to collaborate between local authorities to build these services and write them themselves. So they are in control of these services. And that's a really, really important concept. And if you want to find out a bit more about that work, which is very much ongoing, please do go to ripper.digital. It's a project being led by Lambeth Council and a growing group of other councils. And with that, I will be quiet. Thank you.
Gosh, Alistair, I gave you a hard task there to follow you in, and you very much did. And the fantastic news is I live in Lambeth, so I can immediately go and play with that tool and discover what I can do without planning permission. How exciting. There's one bit of your talk I didn't understand, but I must have misheard it, because I think you said Euan's huge army, but I'm assuming I misheard that and you're actually saying something else, because Euan I thought was a guy who worked from MHCLG, not.
Well, I said Euan whose army, but in
see.
fairness, Euan does work for MHCLG, so it would be
Well, I guess the government's got quite a big army, I guess, ultimately. Right, enough of that. Okay, now I think it's so exciting. Lots I want to respond to. I'm not going to. I'm going to hold myself in. Kelly, I'm going to give you the tough task, because I want you to be as cynical and as sort of as challenging as you possibly can to the brilliant Euan and Alistair, who've set out a vision of the future, which is so compelling. So Kelly, quick thoughts, 3 or 4 minutes, just sort of questions, concerns, responses, both with your current role as sort of running planning process, but also with your former experience as a very senior councillor.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with what's really impressed me first. And the points that Euan has been making about accessibility and how difficult it can be to navigate planning applications and planning information, fully agree with. As a former chair of a housing committee, I used to get a lot of questions from residents who weren't aware of planning applications, found it quite difficult to navigate systems. And having worked in the sector a long time myself, I still find it pretty challenging to navigate my way through some of these online documents. So absolutely agree with what you've identified as a challenge and things that need to change. That's all fantastic. Making things discoverable, brilliant. Alistair, the point you made about validation, again, was my Instinctif hat on. I know how long it can take for applicants to get things validated. So that sounds great. Machine-readable, speeding things up. One concern as an ex-councillor, but you have seemed to address this, is you'll be only too well aware of how tight financially things are for a lot of local authorities at the moment. Certainly my authority, we found it really, really challenging. And to implement these changes, anything that you can do to make it as easy, simple, cost-effective as possible for council, so it's not taking up lots of officer time and finance, is going to be absolutely key. I also just wanted to address something that I think hasn't been captured yet, which is about the wider public and stakeholder consultation in terms of the white paper and the opportunities there. There's a lot of talk of much earlier on engagement, and whilst I think what you're showing will help the public and stakeholders and councillors navigate applications easier, how do we get them to register feedback and share their views? So at Instinctif, we've worked on digital engagement for a very long time, and I know the Create Streets team have some fantastic things that they do too. But for me, from what I've read of the white paper, there could be a little bit of a shift potentially, I'm concerned, about moving away from some of the traditional engagement, be it from that early zoning process or later on down the line. And I wouldn't want people to be excluded because they don't have access to a computer, or their smartphone's not smart enough to handle the new systems. I wouldn't want people to be left out. Certainly if I think of my old ward that I represented as a councillor, I think it was very difficult for some of my constituents to be able to afford fast Wi-Fi, that sort of thing. So that digital exclusion, it is a key point for me. And also not everyone wants to engage digitally. So I think we need to respect what the community at large wants to do and how they want to engage. But having said that, I've seen from my own experience, particularly in COVID, we've all had to adapt. We've had to do a lot more online engagement. And what I've been seeing through my professional capacity at Instinctif is digital has allowed a wider range of people to participate in the planning consultations I'm involved in, different sections of society, which is great, and there's been some positive feedback. But I do firmly believe that the traditional engagement has a big place moving forward, what I would call the silent majority. So how do we make sure new digital systems capture the views of the silent majority of residents. From experience, I know that quite often if you're going to comment on a planning application, it's because you've got a concern, for example, and I wouldn't want feedback to skew the decision-making process because the powers that be perhaps think that everyone or a large percentage is very concerned about an application. And I find really to get those silent majority views, you do need to outreach, you do need to do focus groups, do need to do the old-fashioned knocking on doors. So that would be my observations initially.
Kelly, thank you very much indeed. So, three key concerns there: the numbers, the money; two, digital exclusion, some people can't participate; and then three, can the silent majority get overwhelmed by kind of mob of people with a small mob with strong views make a lot of digital noise? Yes, they can. It's certainly the answer to that. It's how you manage it. Thank you very much, Kelly. Now over to Sue, who is, I think, squatting in front of a lake by the look of things. And when she's not, no, she's sitting up now in front of a lake, and who brings, very much like Kelly, has two very relevant hats, both as a councillor in London, but also as an urban design professional, helping run approaches to urban design really across London and to some degree across the southeast. Sue, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. And I thoroughly enjoyed both presentations. And I think the first instinct is, yes, anything that can help all of us find information. And there's a wealth of information on planning applications, most of which is you just can't find it. I can't find it. If I'm looking up for a particular site in my borough, I struggle to these just randomly named PDFs that you have to search through till you find what you actually want. So I think anything that can bring together that sort of consistency of being able to find things is really good. And I think having that across the board is excellent idea. I think the difficulty I find with that is going to be the lack of resources. As Kelly, and I don't disagree with anything that Kelly set out earlier, is absolutely right. Local authorities have been on their knees throughout the pandemic. And of course, with people working from home, they're making more comments to planning authorities. So ideal time to bring in a more digital approach to planning, but it has got to be accessible. And my concern, I think, is that it will potentially be accessible to a certain type. It's male-dominated, I fear, that it will be, and BAME, the Black and minority ethnic groups, will be excluded. And partially that's the digital divide that we were talking about, and poverty in lots of our communities, or the lack of just a very good internet connection. And we've seen that with school kids throughout the pandemic. Some have, some don't. So there is a huge concern around access to this. And not just, and I think it will reach out to younger people. I think that's a really good will be a really positive outcome for digital planning. And I think it is really good to go down that route. But meanwhile, there have to be checks and balances, and the good old traditional methods continue until, I guess, there's sort of complete rollout. But those traditional methods of the focus groups, of people together talking about what they want to see, working out a vision for their area, what they need in their areas, the amenities that they need, I think is really very important. So resources and the sort of the maldomination of plan tech, or I don't even know if that's the right word, planning technology even, I think are two concerns. I do like the idea that it is driven by data, but then that does say, well, what data are you putting into it? And I think that's really important. And the clarity, I think, and the transparency has to be really easy to see and easy to understand. It's alongside. I think the digital divide is a concern. I think that the planning notices, and you and I love the fact that you like the planning notices. About 10 years ago, I tried to get my local authority to make them child friendly, i.e. more attractive, put colours on them, so that people would stop and look at them and it wouldn't be all just words. But of course, that proved to be impossible through the sort of legality of it all. But I think overarching, there is so much information that people need to understand, and any way in which we can help them by making these tools accessible and available with the right training and the right resourcing, not just local authorities, but also local people that these developments are going to impact upon very much and for the very long term. So I think that those are sort of my key issues, but I do think it's also a very exciting agenda, but it does need to be developed taking people with you and with us if those changes and these changes will come further down the line.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sue. I mean, I think that's quite interesting because we've got some key themes emerging. If I can just say to everyone who is watching, if you could start putting your questions in, we've got some really good questions coming through, and I'm going to turn to them in literally just 2 or 3 minutes. But just before I do, I mean, I think there are 2 or 3 key themes there. There's a question about whether it can be done, and both Kelly and Sue have mentioned amount of money. I'd add one to that, if I may, and perhaps turn to both Euan and Alistair to respond to this, and then quickly talk about accessibility and digital divide, which I think we'll come back to. But just on the doability, I mean, let's put it politely here. The public sector does not have a good track record at major IT projects or at spending money wisely to achieve digital transformation. Now, I actually really like some of what you were showing, because it seemed to me very bottom up and fixing very specific problems which are about driving down costs. So that makes me hopeful. But perhaps just on the issue of whether it can be done, for a credible budget. Perhaps Euan first, as you're the man from the ministry, and then Alistair, and then we'll come to the digital divide in a second.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, I mean, there's also good things which the public sector do digitally. So, and if you have a look at the government digital services and kind of the work that they've been doing for the last decade or so, I think they're a good kind of benchmark of how you actually can do things well. So I think just to put that.
I accept that. I apologise. I wasn't trying to categorize, discredit all your colleagues, but there have been some horrors in the past. You must concede.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like planning, kind of how you do it is very important. There's different ways of doing it. There's good ways of doing it, and there's bad ways of doing it. Absolutely. And I think as a sector, as a built environment kind of sector, we have to understand that there are good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it, and we have to kind of any help in kind of getting that message across, right? So there's good ways of doing digital and there's bad ways of doing digital. It's not all the same. It is very helpful. On the digital divide side of things, I think obviously, as you can imagine, this point comes up a lot. There's digital does not equal paperless. I think this is really important. I'm going to say that again. Digital does not equal paperless. Digital is a way of organizing information or knowledge, as Alistair kind of puts it, and we can then communicate that information in a whole wealth of different mediums. You can print the stuff out. You can put it on an app. You can put it on a computer. You can do whatever you want with it, whatever kind of mediums kind of emerge. So I think it's really important that kind of when we think about kind of the kind of the digital versus non-digital, that isn't really kind of a thing, right? Digital, it's not an either or, right? Digital is a means to achieve kind of lots of different mediums, and we can still print planning notices, hopefully with nice pictures and easier to understand and well designed. Sue, as you've kind of been pushing for a while, you might be able to do 3D printing if you have the data, but primarily you need to have the information in a way which is online, which is digital, and which is open. On the cost, I'm going to let Alistair kind of touch on the cost thing, because I think they've got some really interesting kind of work on kind of efficiencies and stuff. But I think there's kind of wrapped in that kind of with the resourcing and also kind of skills. Kind of we often get asked, well, kind of what are the new skills that the planners kind of are going to need. And to a certain extent, I've got a slight kind of facetious answer. So, well, what skills do you need to use Facebook, or to use Deliveroo, or to use Uber, or to use a lot of these kind of new apps? And the reality is, well, they're so well designed that they're quite intuitive to use, right? Anyone can pick up. I've got an 89-year-old grandmother that sends me messages on our group WhatsApp and on Facebook and on Instagram, right? So these things are kind of, there's ways of designing things to make them kind of very, very easy to use. but there is a change that I think we need to go through. But I think it's more of a cultural change, and this of actually kind of starting to value the information that we're processing. We as kind of the planning system, right? Whether it's planning applications or policies, we're creating a lot of information. We have to kind of value that information, as I hinted before, kind of in my talk, kind of as librarians. In the same way that librarians kind of value books, we have to kind of value all this information, whether every single red line boundary matters, right? How do we structure this information? Where do we save it, etc. So that addresses a couple of the points.
Thank you.
Nicholas.
Brilliant. Thank you. Just yeah, you're quite right. The hardest bit of strategy or doing anything is deciding what not to do. That's always that's the hardest bit. What you don't capture, what you don't do. That's always much harder than deciding what you should capture. Just Alistair, just quickly on the cost point, and having insulted Euan and all his colleagues and their ability to do digital transformation. Yeah, but this stuff is hard. You know, I mean, I've not run digital transformation in the public sector. I have overseen, I'd say, rather than run it in the private sector, and particularly when you've got organizations with legacy systems, with legacy ways of doing things, with thousands of people working for them. You know, this stuff is legitimately and understandably hard. As I think you both said, the planning system is old. I mean, people say it goes back to 1947. Actually, part of the legislative structure goes back a little bit further than that. So there's lots of intricacies here. Is this something we can really do, and how should we do it? How can we pick at it and make it doable, Alistair?
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a fundamental question, because at a very basic level, yeah, you can have all this you can have all the fancy solutions in the world, but if local authorities are not in a position to be able to adopt them, then what's the point? On one level, there's this weird thing where basically it won't surprise you to hear that pretty much every local authority who sort of gets involved in this stuff is like, well, yeah, this is obviously what we want, right? But as you say, from that moment where like everyone's sitting there going, okay, there's a group of people in the room who are understandably and rightly skeptical, and that, by the way, is a good thing. But obviously everyone's like, yeah, great. But actually, it's still a long way between that and implementing it, for all the reasons you described, right? Because of lack of resources, because of natural inertia, because of unavailable data, because of legacy systems, etc. So at one level, the answer is there's just a certain level of resource that's going to be involved in committing to and implementing, essentially investing in this as public infrastructure. But on another level, yeah, that's massively shaping the way that we're going about approaching this, which is working in a very open way, breaking problems into the smallest possible corner to start in. What's the smallest possible useful piece of it that is useful right now that you can then begin to expand out later? But then also, yeah, as I touched on, sort of building pieces that are people can collaborate, that allows, for example, local authorities to collaborate. So, for example, one of the things we're doing with the Plan X platform is, every local authority has its own particular conservation areas, has its own Article 4 directions, etc. But every local authority shares the same GPDO legislation, the General Permitted Development legislation. So we say we've got to build it in a way that bit is all shared. So they all collaborate on that bit, so they're not all reinventing the wheel. So we can have orders of magnitude sort of if you like, savings. And the good news is that the web, things like Git and GitHub, the web has known how to do this stuff for quite a long time. So it's really taking those practices and bringing them into the world of government and bringing them into the world of local government. And that's cool, right? And there's a real energy, GDS has set such an amazing lead on this. There's a real energy to do that, and there's a growing sort of body of knowledge and enthusiasm to do it. And the other point I think is really, really important to make is a digital planning system is not a thing you can buy. It's not even a thing you can finish. So really what this is a challenge of is it's a challenge of capacity building, of inviting planners into a new way of thinking and building teams. And that's our whole, what we're saying, that the importance of this idea that it's not some, oh, here's a piece of software, it does it all for you, all you need to do is press go. It's like, no, here's a thing that gives you, the planner, the tools to do this and keep doing it and keep making it better. And I think that's either a terrible tactic or it's the only tactic that will work. And I'll let you know what the answer is
in a few days, a few years time. Thank you. That's very important. And I think we've now got lots of great questions coming in. So thank you, everyone. Keep them coming. I think one of them you've just answered, actually. So with apologies to Ian Roberts. Ian Roberts asked, how realistic is it to turn planning policies into machine-readable rules, especially when every LA has its own policies? Might it be an impossible task to do in a useful time frame? So I think to some degree, Alistair, you've already just touched on that. We need a network here. I'd like to go to two quite fundamental questions. The first, who's from an anonymous attendee. So Mr. Anonymous, you've done well. You've beaten all the people who gave us your names. These can be people's homes. How do you balance privacy with open data? I think that's quite an important fundamental question in a way that we haven't touched on. And there was another one just up here, which is, of course I can't now find it. And I think a lot of us who've used, machines will recognize this. Is a risk that with machines doing the processes that we end up with the tail wagging the dog? Computer says no. So I think those are two quite fundamental ones. I'm just going to turn back to you and Alistair very quickly on that, and then I've got some questions I particularly want to ask Kelly and Sue. So Euan, just quickly, I'll interrupt you if you've gone too long, and then Alistair, and I'm going to come back to Kelly and Sue in a moment.
So just Nicholas, the open data question, I think is really good. Can you just remind me what was the exact question, so it can be?
Well, it's that we're dealing here with people's homes. So
yes, okay.
You could just type in your neighbour's home
absolutely.
And decide what they can do with planning business, and that feels a little uncomfortable in a way. I understand that.
So I think there's a bigger discussion of what information should be made publicly available and what shouldn't. What should be open and what shouldn't. That's not for me to say. The information that I'm talking about is information which exists already. It's on the web somehow already. It's in a PDF. If you know where to look, you can find it. Right, so it's stuff which is already existing. It's the red line boundaries of a planning application, for example. Right, it's the policies that you want. It's the conservation areas. So it's this information which is currently embedded in kind of PDF, semi-analog kind of documents online, and you can find it, but it's very difficult. That's the stuff that we need to kind of prioritize.
And what about the risk of the tail wagging the dog? We just can't cope with all this complexity, and we end up actually the system where we think we're making it easier, but actually we end up. Yeah. One of the strengths that's made of is that the English planning system is very good at dealing with the unpredictable and the minutiae and the weird and the unexpected. You can make a non-rules based decision. Yeah. Are we just taking out the strength of the English planning system?
I think that will always be there, right? I think that will always be there, and I think there's always going to be there's always going to be the human side. But importantly, again, when I touched on before about how we do technology being as important as what the technology is, I think kind of helps address that as well, and kind of focusing on kind of user needs. So we always start with people. We always start kind of in the digital world. We always start with kind of what are the user needs? Who are the users? Who are we talking about? Right? And it's not the community. There's no such thing as the community. There's lots of different types of people in the community, right? So there's people who can't struggle to see very well, and we have to kind of tailor. The advantage of digital is that we can tailor things to users individually, right? And we can kind of try and create as responsive kind of experiences as possible, and make sure that we start with people always.
Thank you. I hope you can all feel the pace is quickening up as we're getting towards the end here. So the horses are all breaking into a canter now, so we can get as much information to you before the hour ends. Sue, a question for you, and a very good question actually, came in from Amy Burbridge, who's a brilliant employee of Homes England. Yes. Extracting good contextual information from design and access statements about character, local distinctiveness in their places could help LPAs draft their local design codes, very topical subject, but relies on them remembering what applications did a good job. I certainly recognise that problem. Is this an opportunity? You're thinking about design codes with your Urban Design London hat on. Could you see something here that actually is an opportunity for Euan and his colleagues and Alistair and his colleagues to jump on immediately?
Yes, I think it's possible. I mean, the last thing we need is relying on people's memories to what was good or what's bad. Officers move on, councillors move on. You see so many planning applications over a period of time. To be able to capture good codes, good design and access statements, and ensure that they're embedded across, and all the different teams within the planning departments understand what they contain and why they're important. I think it can be really good. And yes, if Euan and Alistair can run off and do that, I think that's absolutely good. I did enjoy, and I'm very pleased to hear about that sharing common data, because if every local authority sets their own system up, that is just a nightmare, and you need to be able to move from one to another. So as much consistency as possible in accessing information, as much sharing that common data, I think is really important. But yes, also capturing the good is vital.
Thank you. So there's an interesting, I think, live opportunity, because obviously with changes coming, that's coming. A question for Kelly. In a way, two questions coming from different directions, and I might then, slightly depending on how you answer, Kelly, I might then refract it back to Alistair. Patricia Cavill who's I think is a parish councillor, or I don't know, knows about parish councils, says that comments submitted seem to be based largely on drawings and computer simulations, when actually some of the reports also need commenting on. Any ideas how these can be made easier when by definition they have to be technical? And I'm deliberately asking you, Kelly, as a former chair of a housing committee. Interestingly, Vanessa Gregory from St Albans, she doesn't say she's from St Albans, but I know she's from St Albans, says that I think many folk, I love the use of the word folk in England. It always sounds slightly American or old-fashioned to me. I think many folk want to see what a new development, what a development looks like, and how it relates to nearby developments, perhaps 3D. And that picks up on Alistair's illustration of the window. So, Kelly, is visual, just from your previous experience particularly, is visual good because it draws people in, or is it actually a little bit of a false god because it misses the detail and the texture that actually you need to make a decision? And then I might just refract that question back to Alistair in a moment.
I think it is good, but I think you need more than just visuals, and everyone thinks in a different way. Not everyone really thinks in maps or images. I mean, that goes back to my point about meeting people in person, discussions, focus groups. It's amazing how much good information and feedback happens when you actually talk and debate and discuss rather than just look at things, no matter how brilliant those drawings look on a screen, or even if you print them out. I would just say, you mentioned a parish councillor gave a question. I would say out of all the different parishes I'm engaging with at the moment, 100% want to have face-to-face engagement as soon as we're allowed to do that again. They're all asking to get back to face-to-face and look at things together around a table rather than just on a screen.
I think it is the thing it's been quite interesting. We've all learned in a way what Zoom can do, but also what it can't do. And we're doing our best here for you, but we may not quite get to that richness of a live conversation. Alistair, just on the importance of visual in both the new planning system, but also the changes that digital planning in inverted commas makes possible. Obviously it's an opportunity, but in what ways might it be a risk?
Well, I think, exactly the reasons you've been talking about. I mean, it won't surprise you to hear, obviously those 2D images are all a proxy, and definitely the future that Euan and I and many others have seen for a long time is a future where 3D models in an open format will be transacted as part of how these systems will just become normal. But as you say, that's kind of missing a bit of the point. Like, that's good, but it's not really the point, right? And I think it goes back to this thing about this important conversation about digital exclusion and so forth. As Cedric Price famously said, technology is the answer, but what was the question? Right. And I think if the question that you're asking is, or how can we use sort of digital to replace in person, I'd suggest you're asking it the wrong question. The correct question for digital is, how can we use digital infrastructure to make in-person conversations better, more accessible and more informed? And that means bringing visual information, but it also means increasingly the ability to talk about impacts and performance, and connect that to data that we have about that local environment, to be able to pull in, have conversations about air quality and traffic pollution and impact on local schools, and to actually talk about schemes in terms of their impact and having kind of those things. And I think, again, those of us who've been involved in the planning system, we know how prone it can be for the planning discourse to get incredibly tunneled and narrowed down. And before you know it, you end up, all you're talking about is what you can see and car parking. But of course, the impact of that development over many, many years is going to be huge. And I think it's really important that we can begin to have a more holistic, informed conversation and hopefully that, and indeed begin to write policies as well that are clearer about the outcomes that we want, and therefore to be able to have a more informed democratic conversation about the outcomes that we want from development, which obviously, Nicholas, is something that Creative Streets is very on.
We do our best. So Susan Brown, I might perhaps just reflect that then onto you. So Susan Brown is getting lucky, asking the last question, I think, probably, and just getting in. I mean, she says, just last week, I think someone was using a portal for an extension to a tennis club. Knowing a lot about it, the digital information didn't cover the bigger picture, especially the issues facing local residents. So you can imagine a situation, let's sort of play devil's advocate. Could you misuse digital planning? How, maybe perhaps it's an unfair, well, let me give you the chance to respond to this, but I'll let you pass back to Alistair if you don't want to, which is, if you wanted to break digital planning, if you wanted to, as a developer, to actually push people down the wrong things to look at? Is that doable? Or is that harder to do because of the universality of the potential access to information?
Yeah, I mean, I think the system as it is today is great for the big developers because they have the money to find out and to know things. They control information in a way which the rest of us kind of can't. A small developer, if you want to put a roof extension in your house, it's a nightmare. You have to hire a consultant, and they're expensive. And I mean, I kind of see digitization as the kind of making information kind of accessible to all. Yeah.
Yeah, just before you jump in, and then I'm going to pull things to a close. Alistair, another question that's come up that I've lost the name was: will this put consultants out of business? Presumably not digital consultants. So, Alistair, just respond to you, and then whether we're all going to be put out of business.
Okay, so I mean, I'd strongly endorse obviously what Euan said, but oh boy, yes, of course, digital also will create scope for exploitation, and this goes back to the question someone asked earlier about, hey, wait a minute, these are people's houses. So one of the ways that we've become really aware of is that if in future, as would be the agenda, these things would all be available through APIs, they could make a bot that could go in and scrape all the local policies and work really quickly to find and exploit loopholes. So there's some interesting things that were like, well, wait a minute, actually, is it democratically sensible to put rate limiters on these APIs in the same way that we stop bots doing other things on the web? Another one came up the other day to do with that thing, which is like, sure, that the planning system has pretty well-defined rules about public purpose of data gathered, but actually never gathering more data than needs to be gathered is a really important concept. So we encountered a really niche example the other day. We encountered this issue of, wait a minute, people do not want to be asking whether people have lead rooftops, because in the old days that data would have been on documents and hard to access. But if it's accessible, that piece of data would now be accessible and an absolute goldmine for thieves. So actually, there's really, really interesting where we have to think a little bit ahead of time and put in a bit of a think about the ethical framework for what we're creating, and the risks. And on the consultants' work, yes, the general picture is the general picture is, if you're a consultant who does the same thing over and over and over again for money, I've possibly got exactly the same thing over and over again for money, and it's really boring, repetitive work, then I've got bad news for you. That bit of your work is going to be going down. But by the way, the bit of your work that isn't boring and isn't repetitive, it's actually about thinking about cities and improving them. Well, we need to have zero carbon cities by before 2050. So the notion that we're going to run out of need for experts about how to make great cities anytime soon is obviously ill-founded, I would suggest.
Saying all the right things for me. Sue, last question. Are Alistair and Euan saying all the right things for you, Sue? I mean, quite fundamental challenges that you and Kelly and some of the audience have quite rightly pulled up. Some risks there that I didn't quite understand about API bots. It scared the hell out of me. I want to come back on that. But so, I mean, are you left more nervous, more comfortable, committed to the right thing? Where do you feel?
I'm fairly comfortable generally with this, and I think that it's because it's moving in the right direction. And I think being able to digitalise the wealth of information that planning applications need and to build cities need is really important. It's just the accessibility and listening to people. It is going to be their homes, it is going to be the places they live, work and play. So it's really important to listen to what they want.
Brilliant, Sue, thank you very much. We are very nearly out of time. I'd like to say thank you to Alistair, Euan, Sue, Kelly. Thank you, huge thank you to Instinctif for making this conversation possible. Finally, well, nearly finally, just a question for all of you. This is our second polling question. Constance, if you could please bring it up. After this conversation, how confident would you feel taking forward digital planning options in your area of work or in your area of activity if you represent a neighbourhood group? Very confident, 1 + 1 = 2 confident, quite confident, sort of, simultaneous equation confident, pretty unsure, or totally unsure. So just that will hopefully come up in a few seconds. This session, if it was so good you need to see it again, it will be online from tomorrow, where you can also see the first of our webinars, which was a discussion on the National Design Code, actually very relevant to this because of its focus on visual metrics. On Thursday at 6 o'clock, we will be running a webinar, Breathe 3, thanks to the Institute for Global Innovation, on air quality. And hopefully the results of our survey will come up in the next few seconds. because I've got nothing else to say otherwise. Kelly, just perhaps while we're waiting for the session to come up, any final thoughts from you in response to the conversation?
Not really, just really useful to everyone's feedback. Thank you to everyone for attending. As an ex-councillor, I do feel more reassured from what I've heard, and at Instinctif, we really do embrace digital engagement. So for me, onwards and upwards, but let's just not forget the other methods as well.
Yeah, I think those lampposts aren't going away anytime soon. So that I think is good news, though maybe slightly nicer pictures on them. 25% of you are very confident, which I think is actually incredibly high. 53% are quite confident. I think that's pretty good. 19% are slightly unsure. I think that's pretty reasonable. And 4% are totally unsure. Well, I think that's pretty good, actually, for something that is as potentially fundamental as this. I think that's pretty good stat. So thank you all for listening, for being so engaged with such fantastic questions. Thank you to our experts and our respondents. And thank you all for listening, and over to you. And that's the end. Enjoy your evenings. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you.